the fact that you can be both Scottish and British and you don't have to choose between the two of them. Those are powerful arguments that need to be made, and we will not be let up until the polls close in a year's time.
But aren't people looking to you to say, I'm tempted to vote yes, but I'll stick with you because I trust you and I've known you a long time?
The proposition that we should split, that we should become independent, is coming from the nationalists. Do we remain within the strength and the security and the opportunities that come with the United Kingdom, or do we cut loose and go it alone? Is actually, are we staying in the United Kingdom or are we leaving?
But what you're proposing is a one-sided debate. I mean,
no,
why do we have to wait for the alternatives? This is going to be the most important vote in 300 years of Scottish history. What you're saying is, trust us and we will deliver. You're requiring this enormous leap of faith. Why, if you accept now the status quo is no longer an option, as you want, Scotland says no to independence, what kind of political leverage do you really imagine Scotland would have in going to Westminster and asking for more powers after a no vote in Scotland? They would have no leverage at all.
No, I come at it from this point of view. The single currency, the pound, is very, very important. Indeed, it is critical to Scotland when you bear in mind that most of what we produce we sell to England, and having no currency problems there is right. The difficulty is that if, for whatever reason, the other side, as it then would be, a foreign country, the rest of the UK, said, no, we're not entering into it. Now, you may say, well, that's irrational, it's wrong, but they may say, we're not doing it. 2 weeks ago.
Can you understand, passionate unionist that you are, that many Scots now look across the North Sea at a constellation of small independent countries of about 5 million on the northwestern periphery of Europe, Denmark, Finland, Norway, all of them well-run, secure democracies, close to the top of the world standard of living indexes, and they say to themselves, well, we could be like that. Most of them have got their own independent currencies as well. Standard of living. Their schools are better, their hospitals are better, the public services are much better.
That's an argument as to how much you spend, how much you're prepared to spend on public services. And again, if you come back to Scotland, in relation to that, we are terribly dependent upon the North Sea for our revenues. 20% of our tax comes from there.
We're not as dependent as Norway. Norway is twice as dependent on oil as Scotland is.
But you've got this very strong, and this is the other part of the argument, the social ties, the cultural ties within the UK, which, 800,000 Scots live and work in England. As many people from the rest of the UK live in Scotland.
Hundreds of thousands of French people live and work in London. It's not an argument out of spite,
no,
out of malice.
I'm a very practical person, and I'm also emotional about being Scots, and I'm also emotional about being Scots, and I'm also emotional about being Scots. I think we will be worse off if we break away from the rest of the UK and go our own separate way.
Let me ask you about oil and Britain's stewardship of its windfall resource over the last 40 years. When you compare it to Norway, the Norwegians have given us a quiet Nordic rebuke with the way they've used their oil wealth. They've created the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world. We spent ours in the 80s and 90s pretty much on welfare payments.
Yeah, and if we had our time over again, then perhaps we should have.
What people who invest their own money in that sector up there in the northeast of Scotland and in Shetland and elsewhere say is, don't count the amount that's left, count the value of what's left. Yes, and if you count the value of what's left, we're probably not even halfway through. Well, but when you use rhetoric like that, dependent on one source of revenue, you're playing into the hands of your critics who say all they've got is fear. All they've got in the No campaign, or the Better Together campaign, is scaring the living daylights out of the Scottish electorate so that they vote cautiously. But by making this argument, you're supporting the right of a government at Westminster composed of two parties that came third and fourth in the Scottish election to impose on Scotland the bedroom tax and other welfare reforms that the Scots soundly defeated at election after election.
Alex Salmond and the SNP clearly say it's in the best interests for everybody, and they lay out some fairly strong evidence in terms of Scotland being the second biggest exporter market for the rest of the UK, exports of oil, gas and whisky. Why don't you want a currency union? Oh, there is a vote for independence, but won't it be incumbent on you? We get to that date, the vote for independence, let's say, it'll be incumbent on you, if the majority of people in Scotland have voted for independence, to make a currency union work, because they will have voted in favour of that too.
Yeah, well, remember, I'm Scottish here.
I do remember. I will never forget.
I get that vote too. And I'm also emotional about being Scots. And I'm also emotional about being Scots. And I'm also emotional about being Scots. Yeah, well, remember, I'm Scottish here. Yeah, well, remember, I'm Scottish here. Yeah, well, remember, I'm Scottish here. Yeah, well, remember, I'm Scottish here.
I do remember. I will never forget.
I get that vote too.